Howdy, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Cowboys of the Osage podcast, brought to you by the Ben Johnson Cowboy Museum, located in historic downtown Pawhuska, Oklahoma. It's old Cody over here, and as usual, I have my co-host with me, Mr. Everything Historian himself, old Jimbo Snively. Hey, Jimbo, where are we at? Who do we have today?
Hey, Cody boy, it's another great day in the Osage, and we're at the home of Mr. Milton Labadie. And Milton, Cody, you call me a historian, but he's a true historian. He's been kicking around in Osage County, born and raised here for over 91 years, and he knows just about everything about the old Indian history, the cowboy history, just everything. He was a banker most of his career, but he knows something about Osage County, and he pretty well knows it. And we're going to get into all that. Just a few years ago, he was honored by the Osage County Historical Society as a true hero and legend.
I was there.
Were you?
Yeah, I did the auctioneering for that one, Jimbo.
Well, he truly is a hero and legend, and we're just tickled for him to invite us to his home, and we're going to find out some stuff about Osage County that we didn't know. So, Milton, welcome to the Cowboys of Osage podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us over here, Milt.
Okay, what are we going to talk about?
Well,
Everything.
maybe about your family when they came here.
Well, my great-granddad and grandmother came with the Osages from Kansas when they purchased Osage County from the Cherokees. And my great-grandfather was Frenchman. The great-grandmother was Indians, more than one. She's Osage plus Oneida and Omaha. The Omaha and the Osages were kinfolk, kind of cousins, like the Kaw or the Kansas Indian. They're all cousins. And anyway, that was in 1871. And then in 1872, just about 15 miles south of the Kansas border, he built a cabin, and it was not anything like what the Osages lived in. It was a full wood cabin.
Now, is that the picture you've got?
Yes.
Might hold that up, Cody.
Yeah, I'll hold it up, Jimbo.
Not trying to tell you what to do, but I just think it'd be a good time to hold that up.
You can tell me anything, Jimbo.
Anyway,
The first house ever built in Osage County.
yeah, according to Nan Tinker, who in 1912 wrote some notes for that Betty Smith down at the Historical Museum, County Museum has, and she makes that statement that that was the first house in Osage County because the most of the Osages lived in thatched, I guess you'd call them huts.
That's right. The teepee thing, that was mostly for Western Indians and stuff, what Plains Indians.
Because it was colder.
Right.
Up there.
And they probably couldn't get the bark and the stuff to make the huts with either out there on the prairie.
They say at one time there's a museum over at Dewey, and the fellow that started that claims between Pawhuska or Dewey and Pawhuska you couldn't see a tree.
Really?
Yeah. So I guess I'm sure there was trees along the
Creeks and stuff.
creeks.
Yeah. Sure.
But this house was built up by the Canier River, and it's built out of walnuts and logs. And this great-grandfather of mine's son, his name was Frank Labadie, and he moonlighted the walnut logs and took them to Jake Barton's sawmill in Dewey, and a lot of the fine homes in Bartlesville now is built with those old walnut logs.
Now, Jake Bartles, he was who Bartlesville was named after, isn't he?
Yeah,
I think he founded Dewey, James Bartles.
Yeah.
but
yeah.
he and Bartlesville fell out, and he headquartered in Dewey.
Couldn't even live in that town named after him. That's pretty bad.
Sounds like something happened to me, Jimbo.
And of course, Dewey had the famed Dewey Roundup,
Right.
where Tom Mix but
Did you ever go to the Dewey Roundup, Milt?
at one time, it's probably in about 1936, we was over there, and I was also at Frank Phillips's 66th birthday, when they had biplanes and they'd go up in the air and write 66 in it, and
Wow.
stuff like that. And but evidently I've heard it, I've seen it in print several times. Of the best cowboy up there of all of them was Henry Grammer.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you've heard
Yeah.
of Henry,
Sure.
but he was nobody could top him.
Yeah.
When he-
Yeah. Pretty good bootlegger too, I heard.
He was a king.
Yeah.
Henry Grammer, he helped start the first Calgary Stampede Rodeo.
Really. I'd never heard.
He really did.
I might tell you one thing I've noticed in your hat band, your beaded hat band.
My wife Leslie made that.
Well, your wife is very talented.
Absolutely, I agree.
Mark Freeman, that passed away about 3 or 4 years ago. He had when Henry Grammer was in penitentiary, I think in Pueblo, Colorado. No, it wasn't.
Montana.
Was it where?
Cody said it was in Montana.
Oh, Montana. He did a hat band out of horsehair and had Henry Grammer, his name, in it. Mark Freeman, I've seen that headband a lot of times, or hat band a lot of times.
Wow.
And I guess one of Mark's kids have it now some way, I guess.
Yeah. That'd be good for the museum, Cody.
Oh, we've been searching for this Henry Grammer piece for a long time. I even talked to Mark Jr. about it, Mark the Fourth, the other day about it. So John Freed told me he's seen it hanging up in John Freed Jr. He said he saw it hanging up at
Wow.
Mark Freeman's house. What else can you tell us about Henry Grammer? Any old stories you heard about him?
I've got somewhere I've got a poem about it. It's a long one. Have you seen that?
I'm not sure, sir. Probably not.
What about when he got killed? Was that a big big? Of course, you wasn't alive when he got killed, but you've heard about it though. Was that on the up and up? Was it really a car wreck, or did he have a little help?
No, he was murdered by Bill Hale's bunch.
Yeah.
I'm just sure I can sit here that he was.
Yeah.
He had to get. He knew Bill Hale. He knew him, and he knew that Henry Grammer's handshake was like a treaty, and Bill Hale just got rid of everybody.
Yeah. Everybody that could testify against him.
Yeah.
Get him in trouble.
A while ago, you told me the Osages, when they moved here to Osage County, you mentioned they purchased their land from the Cherokees.
Yeah, but see, in the Treaty of 1825, when the federal government moved the Cherokees, as well as the other tribes from east of the Mississippi. They had to have a place to put them. And that's the reason that those 3 treaties with the Osages was done, because they were big tribes back there. And the reason they were called civilized tribes is because they wore clothes like civilized people. And of course, a lot of them never spoke English. They just stayed with their language. But the reason that the federal government dealt with the Osages was if you control a land 400, 500, 600 years, maybe 1,000 years, like that map I was showing you, 1714 in Paris, it showed that the Osages owned this land back in the early 1700s. And so the federal government had to have a treaty. So, but the Osages had what they call an aboriginal right to the land. And of course, there was other tribes living in there. The Pawnees also was a little north. And so they, when Lewis and Clark come back, well, the first treaty was between Lewis and Clark, federal government, and I think federal government represented them. And I think Pierre Choteau represented the Osage tribe. But he was a Frenchman, of course, and he didn't do the Osages right. And because they signed everything with a big X. And but they got the signature on it, and it's lasting. In this book I got over here, there's a part of a part of the treaties where they had signed it, a photograph of it. And but in John Joseph Matthews, he explains it a little more clearly how that William Clark continued with the Treaty of 1818 and the 1825, because Lewis went back to Washington, D.C. to tell Jefferson what they had found and everything, and he died on the way back. But and Cody, what was the second part of your question?
Well, I'm just kind of wanting to know how the Osage Reservation, why it differs so much than every other reservation, where the Osage people, they own their oil rights, the mineral rights here, but also I feel like there's other people besides Osages that own land right here in the reservation. I just don't know how it's set up completely different than any other reservation that I've seen personally.
Like I said, they actually came to Pawhuska from Silver Lake area over by Washington County, which was on Cherokee country. They came here in 1872, and then they leased the land to Texas cattlemen. If you ever been down the hill country, and even out by San Angelo and places like that in Texas, where they had thousands of head, they just didn't have any grass. And when you'd ride through Osage County and the grass was stirrup high on your, horseback, they leased a lot of Osage land. And then what happened to them, I can't think of that treaty where the Cherokees and the other tribes, it took it out of tribal sovereignty and gave them to individuals. I can't think of what that act was. And anyway, these government agents talked the tribe into to doing that. And of course, they had to have a vote on it, and the tribal members, all the full-bloods wanted it left in as a community for everyone. But the mixed bloods by that time, they were more numerous and they outvoted, and so that's what become of the 1906 Act. And so the 2,229 Osages, but there's also, they got 657 acres apiece. 160 acres had to become what they called a homestead, where they built their Indian homes on. But the other pieces of the 500 and something acres was it was, scattered all over the county. And so then the Osages had this, and I think they knew that a lot of the women were pregnant, and so they put the deadline as in I think July of 1907. And so that far back, they knew that a woman carrying a baby that baby was a person.
Mm-hmm.
Because that baby hadn't been born yet, but he got 657 acres.
That's something.
And then anyway, and of course, the rest, what happened when the money rolled in. But I've got a deal here in this book that shows all the mineral quarterly and rights. I mean, the quarterly payment.
Right.
Up until 1960 something. And some of them were $1,000 a month. And I got one here I'm looking at. It's a quarterly payment in September the 23rd, 1933, was $72 for a head right.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, when you grew up in the Depression, did it hit the Indians as hard? I know their quarterly payments went way down, but did they have enough, some of them saved money where it didn't hit them as hard, or was it just as tough?
Well, here I'm looking at it. Quarterly payments in 33 was $270 to $500.
Yeah.
And then you know what happened in 1942 when after the Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Right.
FDR put a OPA ceiling price on everything. leather. Soldier boys had to have leather boots,
Right.
leather jackets for pilots, and rubber for all the equipment and everything. $2.52 was the price of oil,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't come up.
Right.
And then the 80th Congress, U.S. Congress, after the war, we had to, since they didn't have any income during that World War II, anyway, they changed administrations, and everything got a little better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, here today, or last I saw, all was $116 a barrel,
Yeah.
compared to World War II, $2.52 a barrel.
Wow. Wow.
And, so that's the reason they had Democrats for Dewey. Osage County was 99% Democrat, but all the Democrats went together and voted for Thomas Dewey
And he got beat too, didn't he?
in that election when I guess Truman
Yeah, Truman.
won.
Yeah.
That's kind of a story on the oil part, but probably the biggest story was when Henry Foster got a blanket lease for drilling in Osage County. He's the only one. He later, and he called his company the Indian Territory Illuminating Oil Company, ITIO. If you go to Burnsville right now, you'll see a little across from Hideaway Pizza, you'll see a store over there called Bambino's or something, a little restaurant there. If you look up on that building, it'll say ITIO on the sign. And that later becomes City Service Oil Company. And they were the leading, Phillips was just barely getting started.
Right.
And that's where Foster and where my sister Annetta lived, just half a mile to the northeast. It was Section 18 of Osage County, and anyway, in the oil company up there, we all referred to it as ITIO.
See, I'd never even heard of them.
Indian Territory Illuminating Oil Company,
I'll be darned.
which later becomes City Service.
Yeah, I remember City Service quite well. I knew people that worked there before they moved to Tulsa.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what they are now. They're not City Service anymore. They got
They
bought out.
must have been merged with someone.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was. I used to know, but wow.
But that's what caused but see, they weren't the only ones. The movie that was made here about Killers of the Flower Moon, there's a lot of other things. You've heard of the Rockin' Chair Ranch?
Sure.
You know who lives there now? McKinley.
McKinley. Yeah, McKinley's.
Okay. All right. In that big stone house where he lived, that was the Easley Ranch, Bill Easley. And he was married to a full-blood. Her name was Maggie. And they had at least 7 kids and her on the that was original Labadie's. Well, Bill Easley was an Indian, said it all, but he had all this Indian money coming in, and he had 8 headrights that he was guardian over, and so that's where he built the Rockin' Chair Ranch off of his wife and kids' Indian money. Well, Mary, I think she was probably the oldest daughter. She married Clem Benning, and Clem Benning had been known to maybe knock in a bank or two. And he married this Mary Easley. Well, they got that means the old man Easley, I'll call him Mr. Easley, he lost that headright, see. Well then, Bob Easley, who was a buddy of my dad's, all these kids, when they got to be 18, they would get their money, from the dad. But if you was a female, a woman, and she got married, all she had to do was come to the agency in Pawhuska, and she needed her money for her household and start her family, and they granted it. So when Mr. Easley had lost all that, well, he was beginning to turn. Well, he's mad at his kids and his in-laws. So Clem Benning and he had threatened each other they were going to kill each other, and they had a big dance up at Herd, and that's the name of the. See, about Mr. Easley, he stood at the railroad, the Santa Fe, that was coming to Pawhuska out of Cherryville, Kansas, and through Hewlett, and then Bowring, and then Big Heart. The reason Big Heart even got established was Mr. Easley stood in the tracks at Herd and ran the surveyors off and threatened he'd kill anybody that tried to put a depot in Herd. So they went 2 miles down the south and and that's what become Big Heart. And Big Heart was laid out in the streets. John Free bought, at one time, bought the whole city, and built 2 homes up there. And anyway, and then they come on down to Nanus and Opaw, and then Pawhuska. Did you know there was 2 other shops in there? And all the cattlemen shipped. They didn't ship by truck.
Right.
They shipped on the train. On the locomotive. So anyway, going on back to this big dance. Well, Mary, her name was Benning, Clem Benning. And she unloaded her husband's gun, and but he didn't know it. Well, he and Mr. Easley got in a fight, and Clem knocked him down, and then he drew his gun. He was going to kill him right there on the floor. But the gun, she had unloaded it. Well, he ran out. He ran out the door, threw the gun down, and ran out the door. And the old man shot him in the side and in the arm. And so Clem's brother, his name was Son Benning. He reached over and got his brother's gun, and Mr. Easley just turned around and, like, you see, it was self-defense. What Mr. Easley did, he just turned around and shot him right between the eyes and killed him. So Clem and his wife, Mary, they moved to Kansas City to get away from everything. And then Clarence Easley he had just become 18 and he wanted to get out from under his dad too. He had a name Mick, but his name was Clarence. And so they had a hearing at the courthouse in Bartlesville. He wanted Mary to be his guardian instead of his dad. So they had a court hearing, and of course Mr. Easley was there too, and nobody was supposed to have a gun. And Clem and his wife and mother and they had a little girl by this time, baby girl, and they parked there across the street from the old courthouse at Bartlesville, and if you knew, the steps come down and went up to a little veranda up there. And so Mr. Easley and a deputy by the name of Rabbit, that was his nickname. He had another name, but anyway, they stepped out there as Clem and his mother and wife was going up the steps, and Mr. Easley just pulled a 38-40 pistol out, and I'll tell you about that pistol. It was in Harv Freeze was the sheriff here, and he had got beat in an election by Musselwhite over all this Bill Hale stuff. And so Mr. Easley got his pistol. Well, he drew that pistol and started shooting at Clem, and the deputy knocked it out of his hand. Well, he drew a German Luger, who was a semi-automatic, and Clem was zigzagging back to his car, and Mr. Easley said, "Run, you rabbit, S.O.B., run," and was shooting at him. Well, then that, being a semi-automatic, that Luger jammed, probably from lack of cleaning or something, And Clem got to his car, and he had a 44-40 Winchester, and he leveled across the hood of his car and shot the old man right through the heart. Said it broke his fountain pen. And
right there at the courthouse in Bartlesville.
Yes, on the courthouse steps, and he said, "The son of a gun got me."
He sure did.
Because he'd always claimed he was going to kill him.
Right.
And so, of course, and Clem stood beside his car, and he was calm as he could be, and he stood beside his car, and he said, Rabbit, come and get me, but the rest stand where you are. And so, he just gave up. And of course, they put him in jail, and he was acquitted. It was a self-defense thing. And of course, the deputy sheriff was an eyewitness to it all, besides his wife and mother. And
had a lot of killings back then, didn't he?
Well, that was on the eastern edge of the county, where the Bill Hale was operating on the western side of the county. I mean, that's one thing. And then when they had this, Mr. Easley had his sale. My granddad, whose name was Mac Van, and my mother was teaching school at a little country school called Red Eagle, which is about 2 miles from their house. He bought one of the saddles that was in Mr. Easley's estate sale. Now, here's what's kind of funny that a lot of people don't know. But then Maggie Easley then married J.R. Carter, the jockey?
GR?
Yeah, okay. His granddad was
was it Charlie? I can't remember what their dad.
well, his dad, but it'd be the jockey's
Great
granddad.
Yeah.
That's who Ms. Iggy had married, and but at that time, and that's where the Carter boys, but they had but his first wife, they had the world champion roper, Barton Carter, and Charlie Carter, that had the ranch out here across from Ellis Thomas's place, that big white house. But that where Ellis Thomas lived, that was a Carter ranch, and see, then Charlie Carter, his wife was named Emerine, and of course all these people we're talking about was friends of Ben Johnson.
Sure.
They all knew each other.
What can you remember about Ben Johnson, old Ben Johnson?
I don't know a lot about him except what he had that little documentary of cowboys in tall grass. Probably I knew more about him there, but I knew quite a bit about Son Johnson.
Yeah.
Cody, you remember before you get to Netta's place, that low water crossing?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that rock house there, Ben's mother, and after she had divorced Ben, she's married to a guy named Fred Ryder, R-Y-D-E-R, like Red Ryder up here. And and Ben came back from Hollywood to visit him. And he wanted to go coon hunting. So Fred and Ollie just lived, we were living there close to where Jarvis lives now. Anyway, I'd been coon hunting before, and they knew it, and so they came up and asked me if I'd take Ben on a coon hunt, and I did. and I had to borrow 2 coon dogs because I didn't even have any. And we stopped at a neighbor's, and he had a bunch of turnips, and this was at night now. And Ben, he pulled one of them turnips out, and he said, "Man, I'd like to eat that," but he reached for his pocket, and he didn't have a pocket knife. So I loaned him my pocket knife. And, of course, when he peeled that purple off of that thing and sliced some big old chunks, and he was eating that, and he folded that knife up, put in his pocket. Anyway, when they had a big celebration here for him one time, I started to ask him if he remembered that coon hunt, but I couldn't bring myself to ask him about that knife. It didn't mean anything anyway. But I remember when Ben first started out there, he had a 56 Chevrolet. And he would leave California and drive to Pawhuska without sleeping. And I don't remember how, but he wouldn't stop anywhere. He'd drive that, well, I imagine, 1,500 miles or more.
Yeah, more than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you grew up on the rodeo trail, that's just how you do it, Milt.
Okay.
You don't stop till you get there. Hey, just to backtrack for just a second, you know, we were talking about all the killings and stuff that's happened over here and some of the outlaws and the things that's happened. And it seems like a lot of it has to do with head rights. I've lived here for a long time. I'm married to an Osage girl, but I still don't know exactly what a head right is and how they came around for the Osages to get. And I assume that there's a lot of other people out there that do not know exactly what it is out there either. And
in Oklahoma, there was a federal act that caused the Cherokees and the Choctaws and all of them to give up their reservation and become landowners. And the Osages refused it for a long time. But where the Osages, what they did, they went ahead and did, like I said, the mixed breeds outvoted the full bloods to go ahead and follow the white man's way of doing things, but they kept the mineral rights as a tribe. So now we have an underground reservation, and it was, I went to many tax committee annual meetings from all tribes. We had them in Albuquerque and Santa Fe and Tulsa and places like that. Even had them out here one time. And but where it seemed like to be like the Hickory Apache Indians out in southern Colorado. If a gas line or an oil line runs across their reservation, or even a power line, you know how you got a electric meter. Well, they know they know how much electricity came in and how much went out, and those corporations pay those tribes even today, and today, but that's not so in Osage County because we got so many white people that own, the land rights. And but I can't think of that act that it was kind of a homestead act, like, and but it's what the federal government used to make farmers out of Indian tribes, and so give them a piece of their own land instead of it belonging to the whole tribe. Everybody, the head right is there was 2,229 Osages when they did that. When they came into Osage County, there's well over 4,000, and there's that many that died. And the Indians have another thing, that when Columbus come in 1492, and then between then and 1900, there was 30. Well, in 1492 there was 30 million indigenous people in North America. In 1900, it has come to 250,000. Now that's from the Canadian border all the way down into Mexico, and because there's Indians down there too. See.
Was that from disease and stuff that the white people brought over, Milton, that caused that?
That plus General Custer and some.
Well, yeah.
And so that's what the Indians call the American Holocaust, because it was from 30 million down to 250,000.
Yep.
And this is stuff that, and you know, our government and writers don't, they don't want that known. Mm-hmm. You know, the government dealt with the Osages and those treaties, but when after the Alamo in Texas in 1836, and they become a republic, and then in 1845 they petitioned Congress for for statehood, and of course the U.S. Congress accepted that, and then they become a part of the United States, and otherwise it was, you know, the old 100,000 watt radio station, XERF of Del Rio, Texas, and you know, you look at El Paso, the Rio Grande River starts up there in Colorado and comes down and goes through New Mexico, goes close to Taos, and all down through Albuquerque, and ends up in El Paso. It was called El Paso del Norte. That's the pass to the north. And when the Spaniards come, that was because they had to have water, so they entered the United States by going up to Rio Grande, and then you know, when they got to Taos and saw those Taos Pueblos, the leader of that bunch, Coronado, I guess, he didn't go up, but he sent a delegation up there, and that was supposed to be the way the sun hit that adobe. it looked like it's gold. And that's what he was after.
Yeah.
And there's, anyway, I like history, and I delve into it pretty deeply.
Why were there so many outlaws here in early days?
Well, just yesterday I saw where Tim Clark put a deal on Facebook about Henry Wells.
Yeah, I saw that.
Oh, you saw that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, back in about 1937, Henry Wells was a good friend of my dad's, and he'd come by, and my dad said, "Well, what you been doing?" And he'd say, "Oh, I've been siphogging around," he'd say. So when we got those first CBs, you know, and everybody had a handle, somebody here in town produced a little book with everybody's handle on it, and mine was Sipog. And but we got in my dad asked him about the Winona deal and the bank robbery, and he took us down there and he pointed out some bullet holes in the old bank building. And but that one merchant that you never see this in Gunsmoke or anything, but when they come up and tied their horses up, it was not close to the bank. And that old merchant shot the horses so they didn't have any way to get away.
Yeah. Yeah, you would never see that on TV.
Yeah.
But that's pretty smart, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was on his part.
Yeah, what I mean. Mm-hmm. I read somewhere that they robbed the post office here one time. Do you remember anything?
Yeah.
Was it the post office where it's at now?
I heard the Dalton gang.
No.
It's a different post office.
Down at giveaway office. It used to be called Mr. Keith at Osage Federal Savings and Loan. He called it the giveaway office because that's where the Human Services Department was.
Yeah.
Before they moved up to the Bank of Commerce in that old building, and then you know what happened? It's empty. And they built a new one out here.
Was that the Al Spencer gang that did that? Or do you remember?
Al Spencer, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dick Gregg and Al Spencer, I think, is what I read one time.
So
they killed two people.
well, the one of the Tolsons here in town.
Oh, you know where Steve?
They said that the Dalton gang robbed the post office here. She walked out in the middle of the night with her lantern, and they shot her.
Okay, where Steve Tolson's office is. Steve Tolson, Steve
Holcomb?
Holcomb's office is. That building just across the street.
Okay.
That's where that post office was.
Okay.
In that building, and I think some of the bullet holes was in that, and when they fired back, there's some across the street too. And another little story about Pawhuska, when in the Depression, when everything went down, there was some guys from Oklahoma City come down, and a lot of the Osages had their money at Osage Federal. It was just savings.
Mm-hmm.
And they made a few loans, I guess. But Mr. Keith, that ran the Osage Federal, he wired Herbert Hoover, sent him a message, and when Hoover got the message, I think they were working on the Bill Hale deal then, but because he said, Mr. Keith told me these guys come from Oklahoma City and arrested those guys, and then he showed me he was an old man, and he was 72 years old when I come to work there. wait a minute. He was 83, I'm sorry. And the bank like the examiner said that he had to have somebody to, in case he died, to operate the place, because just he and Dorothy Davenport, and it was her husband that put these things together for George Labadie, that put this book, those old coins there. Anyway, Mr. Keats stayed 6 months later and left, and then I was left in charge of that bank. And anyway, but they were lonely, he and his wife. She had her own church there on 12th Street or 13th. It had picket wrought iron fence all the way around it, and he lived across the street. And but what I'm trying to say on that is that she was a city treasurer, but she sort of lost. She didn't think straight, so he wrote all the checks for the city employees when that 6 months he's there when I was there. So he did her work. And but they had a little girl, and you know, when they did the washing outside years ago in a big black pot, and that boiling water, that little girl fell in that pot and killed herself. And I think that's what happened to that woman's mind, but I don't know for sure. But Sue and I went to visit them when I come to work over here. I'd worked for the 66 Federal Credit Union and come over here, and anyway, but Mr. Hamilton, that was one of the attorneys for the Bill Hale situation. You know, he had everybody fooled. Bill Hale, he was so nice to them. And Matthew Kane, you remember him? He was a young attorney at that time. And Judge Wharton, I played football with Von Wharton, his son, and Jesse Wharton Jr. is attorney at Bartlesville. And anyway, but he had just everybody fooled. And one thing I got to tell you, Cody, when Mr. Easley was shooting at Clem Benning and he knocked that gun out of his hand, well, this Mick Easley, who the court hearing was about, he traded that gun to Gordon Hughes.
Yeah.
And I traded Gordon Hughes out of that gun, and I have it today.
I'll bet on.
And then he's going to let me trade him right out of it.
Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, I bet.
And I took the little screw that holds the grips on and scratched on the inside of that hard rubber handle is initials HF. That's Harv Freeze. The sheriff that was in the Bill Hale deal here, and he, like I told you, he got beat by in the election by a man named, because he was on Bill Hale's side, but but when he come up for re-election, words kind of finally got out, and so Mr. Easley ended up with that gun. Now I got that gun.
Wow.
And but you have to remember that my grandson Chet is his wife is Mr. Easley's great granddaughter. So he might end up with that gun.
Yeah.
We're just going to have to talk to Chet, Jimbo.
Yeah. I think you're going to have to deal check.
Anything else you want to ask me?
1947. Did you go to the first cavalcade here?
Yes, I did. No, I did not.
You skipped out.
No, I was working on a irrigation farm in the summer from 43 to 53 to my mother's brother's farm in Littlefield, Texas.
Cody, he said he was at that match roping the year before with Jim and Fred Lowry.
I saw that, yeah, because they brought me home.
Yeah.
To go to school.
Yeah.
I just worked during the summers out there. And my granddad, he was betting on Jim Snively, and my dad was betting on Fred Lowry. Fred Lowry was an older man, and but my granddad was old, and there's just something about an old man, guys, when you get to be 91. Of course, Fred wasn't that low.
No.
But my dad, see, being on the eastern side of the county, he knew all those people over there. I mean, from here to Bartlesville is that group of people were mostly mixed bloods, and from here to Fairfax and Hominy was most of your full bloods. It's just like I said, my great granddad that built that first cabin. See, he was full blood Frenchman, and if you when my son, his name is Van, and his wife moved to Lee Summit, Missouri. He's working for Fur Foods in the restaurant business. Just just let it go. Okay. Anyway, that everybody up there pronounced the name Labadie fluently. Because if you want a history of Osages, it's a history of Missouri. And so those people were very familiar with the French names like Labadie, Ravelat, Soldani, Pamunden, Papan, all those are all Denoya, those are all Frenchmen that married into the Osage tribe.
Wow. What about the Tinkers? What you remember Clarence Tinker, the one? Did you ever know him, the one that was killed?
Clarence was named Mick. Oh, you mean General Tinker?
Yeah, General Tinker.
Yeah, no, I never knew him. All I know is he's the first general killed in World War II.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't know that's what Tinker Air Force Base is, Tinker Air Force Base is named after Cody and Pawhuskan, native Pawhuskan.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I heard something about that.
Yeah. He was the highest ranked Native American there for a long time, wasn't he?
And the first general.
First general killed in World War II. I don't know. I never did understand why the general was flying an airplane at the Battle of Midway to begin with.
That's you don't hear too many generals getting out in there and showing them how it's done these days.
No. He was in his plane was shot down. He was probably, I don't think he was piloting that ship.
Okay.
I think you just have to pull it up on your cell phone, and that's the best place to get it.
Yeah.
Or ask Dr. Tinker, the surgeon over at
the heart doctor.
He could tell you.
Yeah.
And probably don't know this, but Joe Soderstrom.
Yeah.
Okay, he married Sarah Tinker.
Yeah, I do remember that now.
That?
Yeah, Yeah.
And I guess she's still living around 100 years old, isn't she?
I don't remember her dying. So
No.
yes, but
he was a rancher, this Joe Soderstrom. And then his first wife was Osage, and that was the mother of Gary. Has a tire shop out here.
Wild.
Gary Wild.
Gary Wild, yeah.
Yeah.
See, and that's where Gary gets his Indian money. Is from old H.R. Wild had married this Soderstrom woman.
Okay.
And had Gary and Pam, and well, your age knows that better than me.
And Joe had a brother, Don, and Don owned the Manhattan Cafe. Cody, way before your time, there was a Manhattan Cafe here, and it was known far and wide, wasn't it, Milton?
They had pictures this size and bigger. I mean, photographs.
Big ones.
Of different ranchers on their horses, and some of them just the cattlemen.
I got a picture from the Manhattan Cafe in the museum.
With all those pictures in it.
Well, it's a great big landscape picture. I think of one of the first possibly cattlemen's conventions. It looks like a ranch tour. I'm not sure.
They'd meet down there on in the early morning. Like 4:30 or 5, and they'd discuss stuff in the business, and some of them go across the street to Elliot Dixon's barber shop and get a clean shave and a haircut, and then go work cattle all day, and. But it was a big place, and then Gary Strand's mother worked there.
Yeah.
And then she ended up marrying Kurt Clymer, who drove a herd of horses from the Yellow House Ranch down in Texas to Osage County. They take too long to start over to build a ranch up here. So the cowboys drove the cattle herd, and Kurt Clymer was with the horse herd that followed. Yeah, he told me that.
Yeah, I knew him. I remember him.
Mm-hmm. He was
sure a good old man.
He was a good old man.
Yeah, sure was. I remember him well.
Mm-hmm.
What about 1954? Did you go to the first Ben Johnson Memorial Steer Open? Were you down in Texas working for your uncle again? Just don't get to have any fun around.
Yeah.
He just never had to have any fun.
Worked all the time.
All he had got to do was work.
Yeah. No, I didn't. I got married in 53 and went to Germany for 18 months and had a son over there. And of course, you had to have a German birth certificate and then another American birth certificate by U.S. military parents in Germany, so when he'd get a passport, he'd have to get that. He had to have both those birth certificates, and so anyway, I had a good 18 months vacation. I mean, I didn't hate the military. Sometimes we was in the field, 2 weeks out of the month over there, and it's pretty cold. Got so cold your beard wouldn't grow, but summer times are beautiful. And when we'd have maneuvers over there, some of the German people would follow us around and pick up the brass. They don't throw anything away. And every town has what they call a burgermeister, kind of like a mayor would be here. And you never sell any paper on the roads or anything, but you'd see a lot of Volkswagens and pull off the side of the road, and the man taking a pee, and just in the,
When you gotta go, you gotta go.
yeah. But I had a good time over in Germany, really did. And didn't mind it at all. Just kind of went through the infantry school down in Fort Benning, Georgia, but I got to apply a lot of that over in Germany. And I was there during the after World War II. Germany, they lost their sovereignty for 10 years. That was part of the agreement. And I was over there from 54 to into 56. But in 55, they got that's when the 10 years come up, they got their sovereignty back. And up until that time, they couldn't make any gun more powerful than a .22 long rifle. And then went to the PX one day, and when they started bringing the bigger rifles in, and the Mannlicher Schoners, which is, they'd be $3,000 or $4,000 now. Instead of a knob on the bolt, they were like what you call a butter knife, the handle you lift, and they were $79.
Back then, when you bought a gun, I guess through a catalog or something back home, how did you get it? Did they just send it directly to you in the mail, right to your house?
Yes, yeah, just Sears and Ward's both made them. I mean, had them made, kind of put their logo on them, but Remington or Winchester made them.
You ever seen a Sears and Roebuck shotgun, Cody?
I have.
Yeah, I have too.
I have owned a pawn shop at one time. Saw quite a few.
You would have.
Saw quite a few of them come and go. You were a banker for a lot of your life.
Well, Montgomery Ward's was probably the biggest seller of them, and they sold. Their guns would be made like on the Browning patent. But they called it something else. I can't remember what they were. But there's all kinds of guns made on the Winchester situation, Anyway, I had quite a collection, but I've given them to my son and my son-in-law. I had one gun I might tell you about. When John Joseph Matthews died, he had given me he didn't. I paid him $200 for a Winchester rifle Model 70. Well, it was the most expensive gun I had, and so I didn't know whether to give it to my son or my son-in-law, and so I gave it to a local attorney here in town to take care of to handle my estate for what was left of it when I died. And so, I don't know. There's not much left of it anyway, but...
There's sure a lot of great cowboys come from this area, Milt. I know you're a fan of a lot of them, too. You like to watch a good roping and watch good horses, and wonder why so many good cowboys came from this area.
Well, here's one thing you might not know. The Pawhuska grandstand and racetrack, that was owned by the city of Pawhuska. It was not owned by the county or the free fair. So when the pari-mutuel bidding come, they had, you could bet out there, but you couldn't wager on it. No pari-mutuel bidding of any kind, see. But Pawhuska owned the grandstand or built it and the racetrack because there was that much interest in short-term racing. John Kilby would, that was a rancher up by Bowring, he would bet you he could outrun somebody on a horse for, I don't know how many yards, 40 or 50 yards or something, and that kind of stuff. Well, I was out at one of those rodeos one time. It was, they were just having races out there, and there was a guy out there that name was Maynard Revard. Now, not the one you know,
right?
The older one. And he was standing there, and there was a paper cup about from you to that chair there with wheels on it. Anyway, he bet it. He was taking bets, and I saw this handful of money that he could jump off of 1 foot and land on that paper cup. Well, I mean, you can't imagine how many people were betting him that he couldn't. And he did. And my uncle that I worked for out in Texas, he turned to me and he said, "That's the reason you don't want to bet. When somebody says they can do something, you don't want to ever bet against them." I wouldn't have bet that Cody could auctioneer stuff off of for a benefit for the museum down there. We're twirling a rope around his head for 30 minutes.
It was for the Historical Society. I was trying to do something historical for them, something that's never happened before.
It was historical. Cody is the best performance I'd seen in a long time.
Well, Milt, you were a banker for a long time. Let's just do a hypothetical. I'm going into the bank. I'm going to borrow some money off of you. I'm a cowboy. I got me a pretty good horse. I got 2 good ropes, 2 good strings, but I'm needing a little money to get up to Cheyenne. I've been practicing every day. I'm probably going to come home, go back to work if I don't do good.
You probably read a lot of stories.
What are you thinking? I hand that loan application across it. I'm just going to go to Cheyenne, win me some money, and need me a little rodeo money.
Yeah. You make those decisions on your past experience and your trust in people. When you're a banker and you trust somebody, it's like the old handshake used to be between cattlemen. They wouldn't break that promise for nothing. And when I come to Pawhuska, I had a degree in agriculture, animal husbandry from OSU. And I ended up with about 42 old 13, 15-year-old cows from Mike Friend. Mike Friend had registered Herefords, horned Herefords, but and he would sell you a bull or a carload of bulls if you wanted to. People keep a bull 2 or 3 years, and then if they found out they're missing a few calves, well, they'd go get them younger bulls, And anyway, that's what he was known for. But these old cows, Dude Labadie was the one that told me he had them for sale, and they would just be just like a regular cow. But he had the 5th generation of genealogy with each one of these cows. And so I don't even know where I got the money, but I bought them. Then my father-in-law bought them. Some of them were muley or been dehorned, and he took the muley ones because he'd bought the old Schultz place down at Winona, and so I took the horned ones, and of course then I had to brand the horns and all that, and but I didn't have any land. I just had less than 200 acres, but Mr. Bivens had about probably around 2,000 acres, all the way from Winona up to the old Snively Dairy, and on the head of Birch Creek. And anyway, but he only had it about 3 years, and he sold everything out. And but I ended up with some real nice heifers. You remember the Cotting Research Lab?
Sure.
Isn't that where the Reed Drummond?
Yeah, she's got her lodge is right out there by. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a historic place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, when Cotting, Don and Charles Cotting, they had what they call a rent-a-cow, where people in Tulsa could rent a cow and then they charge it off on their in their cattle business. And they played that for a long time.
What do you do with your rental cow? Pet it? Milk it?
Well, you raise a calf out of it.
No, they kept the cattle up on the ranch, and the people in Tulsa, they may not even see it, but they owned it, and because it was a tax deal for people with money. And anyway, I had this set of heifers. It's about 15 of them, and they wanted them graded, and so the county agent come with them, and he was Tom Drummond's father-in-law. Who would that be? You remember?
Yeah, but I don't remember.
Okay.
I remember.
Well,
Tom.
anyway, he was the agent here, and he and the guy that ran that for him up there come out to my place out south of the fairgrounds, a mile and a half. And we got them in, and that was the prettiest bunch of heifers you ever saw. And but he was buying them so they could sell them, rent them to these people in Tulsa, I guess. Anyway, I had two that graded out at 96. 100 would be a perfect animal. And the rest of them was like from 92 to 96. They were good. Of course, out of these old cows I'd got from Mike Friend and a Jack Walker bull. And but one of them went down to about 85. But all the rest of them was in the 90s. And so I apologized to this old boy for that one they just didn't match up with the others that good. And he said, you shouldn't be apologizing because what we usually have up there, they're running in the 70s. and I let them, but I'd already made a deal.
Yeah.
So much ahead. And, but somebody got some real good cattle. And I had the 5-generation pedigrees on their mothers. And you know who Mr. New Mexico was?
No.
You know where the T.O. Ranch is?
Mm-hmm.
What was his name? He and Jack Walker switched bulls. Now, what you don't know, or what a lot of people don't know, when Jack Walker's heifers, before they're getting ready to breed, they might weigh, 11, somewhere between 11 and 1,200 pounds, maybe. They'd be up there almost 2-year-olds. Big nice cattle. Mr. Mitchell's is his name, Albert Mitchell, in New Mexico. His cattle would be going between 12 and 1,400 pounds. You know why? The grama grasses in the short grass country, they have nutrients year-round, even when they're in the wintertime. That's the reason the buffalo migrated from here to the northern plains, because it would sustain them. You get our tall grass here, and come September the 1st, it drops from like 22% protein down to 7 or 8 in October. And so that's the reason that the people in this country has to feed their cattle through the winter. But up in that short grass country, what they call grama grass, it'll sustain them. And so his cattle, and they were switching breeding stock, mixing them up.
Yep.
And but the T.O. Ranch out of this side of Raton, New Mexico, was Albert Mitchell. He was known as Mr. New Mexico.
Huh.
Does that make sense to you, Cody?
I'm listening to every word you say, soaking it up here.
Yeah.
Soaking it up. We're going to have to come back and do another one of these with Milt pretty soon, Jimbo.
I know it. He's a wealth of history.
He is.
For sure.
He for sure is. Well, Jimbo, do you got anything else for old Milt today?
Well, just thank him for inviting us into his home, and wow, just all the old stories and the history he knows. It's really, really special, and it's good to get that on tape. And
Well,
really
if I didn't know anything, I feel, like old Red Seagull. He said, I'm not rich, but I'm blessed. And that's just exactly how I feel.
Yeah.